Exiled Jedi and former Sith Kriya thought of the Force as a deceptive, dark, disinterested divinity during the old Sith Wars. She argued that the Force didn't mind taking lives as long as peace persisted by citing the countless wars fought by countless sentients that formed a symbiotic relationship with everything else that depended on the Force, the binary nature of light and dark and its recurrent conflicts. The core belief of this line of thought was that in order for living things to be really free, they had to cut themselves off from the will of the Force by exercising their own free will. Both the Jedi and Sith, two organizations that rely on the Force, criticized this viewpoint, and even though Mitra Surik received Kriya's lessons. However, Grandmaster Luke Skywalker arrived at the same conclusion after defeating the dark creature Abeloth. Even though he didn't think the Force had any feelings or intentions, he still thought that the massive amount of violence and destruction that it ensured after the One's demise was due to the Force being unbalanced. Instead of believing that the Force should be destroyed, however, Luke instead took the approach that, to keep the galaxy at peace, Force adepts had to actively maintain the balance of the Force. The A&T monks of the Cathal Rift had a unique take on the Force that was comparable to the Jedi's. They didn't see good and evil in the Force, rather, they saw a spectrum of coloration, much like a rainbow. Unbeknownst to most Jedi and Sith, these people thought that the Force could take on a variety of forms, each of which bestowed its possessor with special skills. They thought there was much more depth to the Force than could be summed up as light or dark. Their viewpoint placed Force users somewhere along a scale beyond just good and evil. As a river that runs through the galaxy and all living things, the Fallen Nasi termed the Force the White Current. No one can change the flow of a river with only one hand, and neither can one person alter the current. As a result, the Fallen Nasi completely submerged themselves in the current and allowed it to carry them. They were able to direct its flow without forcing it, which gave them access to previously unavailable Force skills. Given that Sith mages founded their organization, it should come as no surprise that the sorcerers of Tund held similar beliefs to the Sith. But they saw the Force as a mystical force and used occult symbols and rituals to control it. Despite the fact that the Jedi considered the sorcerers to be just another Force sect, they often attempted to convert the sorcerers by teaching them to wield the Force without the use of magic or mythicism. However, they were unsuccessful, and eventually the Jedi contented themselves with making sure the sorcerers did not descend into the dark side. The Killiks equated the ones with the Force. They saw the daughter as embodying the Force's light side, while the son was seen as embodying the dark side. In the world they called home, their father worked hard to keep the peace. Extremely potent, their infighting was terrible until another arrived to settle things within the family. Unfortunately, this led to the birth of Abeloth. In the Mortis Monolith, the father of the Ones told Anakin that he was destined to take his place as the dying father and govern the son and daughter during the Clone Wars. An intense scene of power would bring about all the Ones' deaths. The Killiks were unaware of this and awaited their arrival when they learned Abeloth, the bringer of chaos, was freed. The Knights of Zakul were loyal to their eternal emperor regardless of whether they were doing good or evil, and they saw the Force as their payment for doing so. They became more powerful the more they obeyed his commands. Following the Eternal Empire's conquest of the galaxy, Satil Shan and the ghost of Dathmar gained a new understanding of the Force, describing it as a paradox possessing contradicting traits, such as that had a will but needed someone to command it. Those who were particularly attuned to the Force could hear a disturbance that formed in the Force when a large number of organisms died. Inflicting a wound in the Force by releasing the mass shadow generator and utilizing nuclear bombs to decimate Sirocco's cities, the Mandalorians won the Battle of Malachor V during the Mandalorian Wars. The destruction of Alderaan brought about a similar effect. Obi-Wan Kenobi felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. The destruction of the Corita system had a similar effect on the learners of the Jedi Praxium. It was suggested that Yoda could not even stand on Kashyyyk as Order 66 was being executed. Yoda seemed overcome by the chaos of so many Jedi deaths happening at once. It's conceivable that individuals who are very attuned to the Force may get glimpses of whatever is causing the disruption, but the intensity of these glimpses would vary greatly depending on the adept's training and inherent connection to the Force. So if this is the case, Yoda may have known what occurred when Obi-Wan Kenobi was ready to investigate the surveillance footage from the Jedi Temple. While disturbances was the more common term, tremors were also used, like when Darth Vader alluded to Obi-Wan's presence aboard the Death Star. Disturbances could also be felt lingering from past events, such as when Leia Organa felt a disturbance when she visited the place where Anakin slaughtered an entire village of Tusken Raiders. The Yazamari were a race of reptilian-like tree dwellers that were resistant to the majority of the Force's negative effects. The creatures exuded a bubble which pushed back Force energy, making them useful tools for individuals such as Grand Admiral Thrawn, requiring a means to nullify a Jedi's abilities. They first appeared on the planet Merkur. Collectively, Yasamari produced a considerably large bubble, which sometimes extended several kilometers beyond their home woodland. They had to devise this plan in order to avoid dying at the hands of the Vorn Scares, pack creatures that use the Force to track down and kill their victims. The Taozen, a giant gelatinous predator, has a similar characteristic. The existence of at least one of these monsters in the bowels of Coruscant's Undercity about 10 years before the Clone Wars is a little known fact about them. Even though Gurlanins had the ability to hide from the Force, they were also able to make themselves noticeable in the Force whenever they wanted. While not immune to the Force, Hutts with a strong enough will were highly resistant, having an innate defense against Force-based mind manipulation. Mind tricks also had little effect on Turdarians. The Emperor made use of the Yunkori and the Dashadis to differing degrees because of their resistance to the Force mind manipulations. The Yunkori in the years leading up to the Stark Hyperspace War, and the Dashadi in the years immediately after the Great Jedi Purge. In addition, the Jedi faced serious danger from the Force-resistant beings known as the Terran Tactics. According to reports, the Sith created them specifically to target the Jedi. The Jedi attempted to track down and kill every last Terran Tactic by holding a great hunt once every few years. The beast looked to have a remarkable longevity and toughness. Although not natural, Foxen could hunt Jedi and other Force users by noticing their Force scent. They were immune to direct Force manipulation, just like all the other Yuzong Vaughn biots, and Jedi could not sense them. This, in addition to their other abilities, made them a significant threat to the Jedi Order. I don't know how to pronounce this name, so I'll just spell the creature's name. It's HSSISS. They could influence Force-sensitive beings around them. One would perish from the effects of a dark side poison if bit by one of them. They also had the ability to conceal themselves and become invisible, possibly doing so through the Force. Whether or not this is accurate, there is evidence that certain Sith practitioners saw their power as separate from the Force. Since the Yuzong Vaughn had lost their connection to the Force circa 15,000 BBY, no one could perceive them or have any direct effect on them. The Jedi thought that all life relied on a symbiotic connection with the Force to some degree. But others, most notably Jason Solo, hypothesized that the Vaughn were linked to the Force in a manner that the Jedi could not detect. However, Jedi Knight Mitra Surik seemed to dispute the idea that all life was reliant on the Force. During the Battle of Malachor V, she cut herself off from the Force so completely that she became a wound in the Force, completely dead to it and completely disconnected from it. The Sith Lord Darth Traya wanted to use Surik's condition for her own purposes, and she saw him as evidence that life could persist outside the Force. That concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. May the Force be with you, always.